Samson, a man who was dedicated to God but had a weakness for women. He died in captivity, but he took 3,000 Philistines with him. Judges chapter 16, verses 28 to 30. Then Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me. I pray thee, this once only, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines. For, Lord, thou knowest the anguish of my heart and the oppression of my hands this whole year. Surely the match of my strength is not in mine own power, and the victory of my feet is not of mine own swiftness. But thou hast forsaken thy servant into the hands of the uncircumcised, that I may have no more understanding at all of might and strength. And Samson awoke out of his sleep, and he wist not that his hair was cut off. And he pulled toward him a great iron candlestick, and with it he smote 1,000 and killed them. And he fell upon a piece of ground where there was a great jawbone of an ass. And when he saw it, he took it in his hand, and he smote him with it so many thousands that he slew them, till his hand waxed weary. And he threw the jawbone away out of his hand, and he died. I'm sure you've heard the stories about Samson before, and most people associate his strength with his hair. But did you know that Samson would have been able to do what he did in this passage even without his hair? Why? Because Samson's source of strength didn't come from his hair. His strength came from God. And we see that in this passage, even though his hair was cut off, he still managed to kill thousands of Philistines. In fact, let's take a look at this story a little more closely and see exactly what happened here and how Samson was able to slay so many Philistines. To fully understand this event, we need to go back and read the previous chapters to get some background information. In the book of Judges, the Israelites kept on falling into the same cycle over and over again. They would obey God, so he would bless them and make them prosperous, but then they would turn away from God and serve other gods and goddesses, at which point God would allow their enemies to oppress them. And that's precisely what's happening here. The Israelites have turned away from God and are being oppressed by their enemies, the Philistines. That's why we see Samson crying out to God and asking him for strength. He wants to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. Now, if you're familiar with the story of Samson, you probably already know that Samson had a weakness for beautiful women. And in Judges chapter 14, Samson went out to get grain in the fields of Bethlehem, which was his ancestral home, and he saw a young woman there gathering grain. And Samson asked his father to marry her, but the girl's father didn't like this idea because he thought that Samson wasn't good enough for his daughter. And he says so in verse 20. This is what the father said, With much people, my daughter, have I not seen that you set him up among thousands of Israel? Why then should I give him to a stranger? And this displeased Samson. So he did something really stupid. He killed a lion in the fields and then used the carcass of the lion to make a riddle for the young men of his own city. And whoever could figure out the answer to his riddle would get to marry his daughter. And the riddle was, You shall surely be gathered to me again, but you shall not return to me. And Samson kept on taunting these young men, and they just couldn't figure out the answer. But the Philistine woman figured it out, and she basically told Samson's father the answer. And then Samson's father believed that she was the one who deserved his daughter. And that's why we see in verse 31, Samson's anger was greatly kindled, and he went down to Ashkelon and took a fox's tail. And, throwing it into the midst of the standing grain, he set it on fire, so it became a fiery girdle. And that's how Samson started his feud with the Philistines. His father-in-law gave his daughter to another man, and then he went and burned some grain fields belonging to the Philistines. After that incident, Samson continued to kill many thousands of Philistines. And after raping a prostitute in Bethlehem, he fled to the land of Judah and stayed in the cave of Etam. And here he was found by the Philistines, and they bound him with fetters of brass and put him in prison. And they called for him, saying, Come, I pray thee, Messiah. And he came unto them. And surely this time Samson was caught. His eyes were put out, and he was forced to grind in the prison. And every day his strength was getting less and less. And then the high officials of the Philistines decided to sacrifice to their god Dagon and bring Samson out of his cell to entertain them at the temple. And now we come to the passage we read earlier. It's important to note that Samson wasn't actually allowed to go to the temple. Instead, they brought him out and made him walk along the pillars supporting the temple. And as Samson walked along those pillars, he must have felt the Spirit of God coming upon him, because he suddenly calls out to God and asks him for one last chance to get his revenge, and then something amazing happens. He wakes up, and the first thing he does is reach for a pillar to steady himself, but he can't find anything. And he pulls down a great iron candlestick and slays 1,000 men. Then he finds a jawbone of an ass and kills thousands more with it until his hand becomes sore. And finally, he throws the jawbone away and dies. So the big question now is this: how did Samson become so strong? After all, he didn't have his secret source of power anymore. Well, the truth is that Samson didn't need any special powers or gifts from God in order to do this. He was already strong enough to do this. Just listen to Judges chapter 13, verses 24 and 25. And afterwards, the woman conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the young man increased and grew, and became very mighty in spirit, and was very strong in power. And he was like unto other men, till he came to show himself unto the woman that was his mother. And she told him, My son, why have you done so? For I have told you, if you do it yet again, I will surely go out of my tent and stand before the judge and tell him everything about you. So you see, even without his secret source of power, Samson was still stronger than any ordinary man. He was blessed by God and endowed with super strength. So he didn't need magic powers or enchanted objects in order to do what he did. He was just blessed by God with extraordinary strength. But what amazes me here is not the fact that Samson was strong. Of course, we've already established that he was extremely powerful. What amazes me is the number of men he killed with a candlestick and with a jawbone. Let me give you some context. At the time, Samson was living in the cave of Etam. The Philistines surrounded the cave and besieged him there. And when they left, he escaped and went to stay with the tribe of Judah. And later, when they caught him and put him in prison, it says that his strength was greatly spent. Now, it's important to note that when the Bible says that his strength was greatly spent, it doesn't mean that his divine strength from God was gone. His divine strength never left him, because God never removed it. I believe what it means here is that his physical strength was greatly diminished. This would explain why he needs to grab onto a pillar for support. It also explains why he killed so few Philistines compared to all the other times that he fought them. Remember, Samson has killed thousands of Philistines before, but here he only manages to kill around 3,000. So we can clearly see that his strength was spent. But despite that, he still managed to kill 3,000 Philistines with a candlestick and a jawbone, which just blows my mind. And I think it's important to mention here that these weren't ordinary Philistines either. These were high officials. They were probably the strongest and most experienced warriors in the Philistine army. And yet they couldn't defeat Samson, even though they had him right where they wanted him. They had him walking along a narrow ledge while being watched by the entire Philistine army. It was the perfect opportunity to get rid of Samson once and for all. But they failed. They failed miserably. Samson killed more than 3,000 of them, and they weren't even able to stop him from escaping. That's why it says in Judges 16:30 that he pulled toward him a great iron candlestick and slew 1,000 and killed them. And he fell upon a piece of ground where there was a great jawbone of an ass. And he took it in his hand, and he smote them so many thousands that he slew them, till his hand waxed weary. And he fell there, not because the Philistines overpowered him, but because his hand became sore, from lifting the jawbone. So what can we learn from this passage? First of all, we learn that Samson didn't need any magical powers or gifts from God in order to be strong. He was already gifted with strength beyond that of any normal man. And secondly, we see that although Samson was a flawed man, a man who struggled with sin and who made mistakes, God didn't abandon him. He was still there, helping him when he called on him. And he gave him the strength to do what he had to do. I hope this video helped you see Samson in a different light. Until next time, thanks for watching.